Welcome to the Science and Education segment here on Impact. I'm Barbara Brabetz. With us today, another one of our medical miracles, Dr. Stephen Goldstein. Dr. Goldstein, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I understand you are a general surgeon.
That is correct.
But you weren't born a general surgeon. How did you get there? Where did you end up? How did you end up here in the Capital District as opposed to somewhere else on this planet?
I grew up outside of Baltimore, went to medical school at the University of Maryland after graduating from college with a biology degree and discovering that I enjoyed this sort of thing. I'm one of those people that have always been a tinkerer, fix my own cars, fix my own this, and so surgery was a natural. Somewhere along my life, I discovered that I tremendously enjoy skiing. And I also got married and had some children along the way, and my wife did not want to move out west, so here we are in the Northeast. She has family in New York City, and so we live in Albany.
That's great. So your practice really has two different locations. You have a Watervliet location.
That's correct.
And then another one in Clifton Park?
Yes.
And so depending on what day of the week, you look at the calendar and say, oh, I got to drive here or I have to drive there.
Pretty much. In fact, usually I end up in both offices on the same day.
I appreciated it. Today is one of your working days, and you've cut out some time for us, so to speak. That's the first of my surgeon jokes in order to get you here, here in the studio. So as a surgeon, by the way, I Googled you. Nothing too nothing too bad comes up. That's good. But you have quite the number of accolades. You're board certified.
That's correct.
In general surgery.
Yes.
And it seems that you're a hernia guy.
I am I'm certainly the busiest hernia surgeon in this area. And the last time I checked on one of the health department websites, I think there was two or three guys in Manhattan and one guy in Buffalo that did more hernias yearly than I do. But I do a lot of hernias. I've always enjoyed hernia surgery. And with the modern minimally invasive technology, we can fix people's hernias and send them on their way, and they're generally back into their normal life within a few days.
So
makes life wonderful.
It does. So I'm thinking back to the old way that hernias used to be done. Some of my family members are the victims or patients of hernia surgery, where there's actually scalpels. They cut through the muscle. They get down to where they need to get down to, and then they either put a patch in there. How does that really work with a traditional surgical sense?
What a hernia is a defect in the connective tissue. We call it fascia. The lay term for it when you're eating a steak is gristle. I don't want to be too graphic, but
it works.
Muscles are muscles. And so it's not actually a muscle problem that causes a hernia, but it's actually a defect in that connective tissue that surrounds the muscles and what actually holds you together. Your abdominal wall has no bone in it, and so there's nothing but this fascia to hold you together. And there are naturally weak areas in your abdominal wall. The groins are the most common. There are blood vessels inside of your body that have to get out to your legs. And so those natural openings are potential weaknesses, and you always have positive pressure inside your belly, so things are always pushing out. And when it opens up enough for intestines or fat to push out, then you have a hernia. And the reason hernias are a problem is that stuff pushing out is usually unsightly and can push on nerves, causing pain. And what's very troubling to us as doctors is that if an intestinal loop comes out of there and gets twisted and its blood supply gets cut off, that creates an emergency, which generally happens on Christmas Eve. And so we like to fix these electively. What we have learned in the past 200 or 300 years of fixing hernias is that if there's a weakness in the abdominal wall and you try to use the muscles and tissues that are already there to repair it, those tissues were weak and failed originally.
The first time.
If you just try to sew them back together, they're likely to fail again, which is why you talk to people that are older, they know someone or they themselves have had their hernia fixed 3-4 times before it finally took, which meant there was so much scar tissue that there's nothing else really left to fail. In the past 30 years, perhaps, surgeons have learned that if you reinforce the tissue with a mesh, which it's what we almost always use as a polypropylene screen. It's essentially made out of the same material that soda bottles are made out of. And it's very inert. You can put it in the body. There's generally not a reaction to it. Yes, there have been problems, and if you watch TV, you'll see the class action lawsuits, and those were very specific issues having to do with mesh put in certain places. But for the most part, this mesh has been used without problems for many years. And so we use a piece of polypropylene screening to reinforce the abdominal wall, and that provides a permanent repair, such that most good hernia surgeons, their hernia recurrence rate should be well under 5%. The trade-off, at least with open hernia surgery, is that there seems to be a fair amount of postoperative pain. And the advantage of doing them laparoscopically is that you're putting the mesh behind the tissues rather than on top of the tissues, and so the mesh doesn't have to be sutured, and there's much less chance of hitting nerves.
So let me see if I can use an analogy. If we say I rip my jeans, I can take the jeans and I can sew the two pieces together, and I can just sew them, and then I could rip at that same point, or the jeans around it might be frayed, right, and then it might fail. Or I can take a patch in the conventional surgery, put it on the outside, and patch the hole in my jean.
Correct.
But that creates some pain. Or I could patch underneath by inserting it what you call laparoscopically, and that the patch doesn't show, and also you don't have the complications with the pain. So what is laparoscopic surgery versus traditional cut them like they're a steak kind of surgery?
Well, when you do laparoscopic surgery, the name comes from the device that we use, which is a laparoscope, which is essentially a telescope. It's an optical tube that has lenses in it, and it's connected to a small closed-circuit television camera. And so instead of the surgeon looking into your belly or looking into another part of your
pulling
organ
it apart
system,
and kind
which
of checking
means,
them.
yes, making a large enough incision to see and put your hands in, you are watching on a television screen during the operation, and you can make little small, approximately quarter-inch holes, and we have special tools that we put in the holes that we can use to manipulate, cut, sew, staple the tissues without making a large incision. The advantages are that, A, we're not pulling and stretching on the muscles as much, so there's less pain from that. There are very small incisions, so there's less pain from a large skin incision. Because these incisions are so small, there's much less chance of getting a hernia in those incisions. There's less chance of damaging the nerves that go through that area. There's less chance of bleeding. There's less chance of infection. All of these complications that go along with open surgery are reduced with laparoscopic surgery. The disadvantage to it is that the surgeon loses his ability to feel the tissues, their tactile sense. So traditionally, you put your hand in the belly, you can feel for tumors and things like that. Now you have to rely purely on visual senses to see things. So that definitely increases some of the chance of missing things, that sort of thing. It's a totally different skill set to be able to cut and sew using sticks that are 1.5 feet long and watch it on television, as opposed to cutting and sewing with your hands.
It's kind of like eating Chinese food with your hands versus chopsticks.
Kind of.
I mean,
yes.
Minus the 8 years of training to do so.
Yes, if you want to take your surgeon out for Chinese food, and if he can eat with chopsticks well, you can probably do laparoscopy.
It's a start.
Similar.
Anyway. Let's move on and talk about another minimally invasive surgery that your practice is known for, and that is the repair of varicose veins. So I think we have a graphic that we can show to talk about how varicose veins are different than like a traditional vein, say, in the leg. So could you describe the differences between a regular vein and a varicose vein?
Let me start just a little bit beyond that.
Sure.
There are two kinds of blood vessels in your body, which not everybody understands all this. So you have veins, which carry the blood back to your heart, and the arteries, which carry the blood from your heart to all of your tissues to bring oxygen and nutrients. And most people think about vascular disease, they think about arterial disease, which is indeed a much bigger problem. Because if there's not enough blood getting to your tissues, not enough oxygen getting to the tissues, well, then they die. And we all know that things like smoking and having high cholesterol and high blood pressure all cause disease in the arteries. The veins, however, are almost as important because the blood has to get back. And if the veins do not work like they're supposed to, the blood will pool in the extremities, and that causes a pathologic state, that causes disease.
That gravity gets in the way.
Gravity, yes, gravity's usually your friend, but not always. And because you don't have a heart in the bottom of your leg to pump the blood back up to your real heart, your muscles need to do the job of your heart. And the way that works is there are little valves, little one-way doors located along the path of your veins, and they open upwards. And so as you walk, the muscles squeeze and the blood is pushed up, and then when you relax the muscle, the doors are supposed to close and keep the blood from going back down. There are a number of reasons why those doors don't work. Some people congenitally have weak valves or are missing valves, and so they have varicose veins. Anything that causes an obstruction to those veins, and this is why women get more varicose veins than men, because they have babies, and when they have
It's a very large obstruction.
when you have a big 9-pound uterus
very large and
sitting
stuff.
in your pelvis, blocking those legs, those veins that come up from your legs, you have an obstruction which can damage these veins, the valves in the veins. And you have to remember that those valves, they're thinner than a piece of tissue. I mean, they're like very, very thin. Although they are pretty strong, they're very thin. And so they can be damaged easily. And then the other problem is people get what we call phlebitis, which is clots and inflammation in those superficial veins, and that can destroy the valves also.
So you end up with those unsightly and also clinically pathological, in that sense, bulges, say, on the legs, either on the thighs or the shins. So in a minimally invasive way, how would your practice deal with varicose veins?
The first thing to do when evaluating a patient with vein disease is to do an ultrasound, which is a way of looking at how the blood flows in the legs and determine where the problem is. Most people with varicose veins, the problem will be in the main superficial venous system. We call it the saphenous vein, and it runs along the inner thigh down to the ankle. People ask me, well, if you take that vein out or destroy that vein, how's the blood get back? There are plenty of veins. The reason that the way I like to explain to people is if you have one road that's not working right, but there's still a lot of other roads on the side, and you close that bad road, the cars will still go on the side roads. And your venous system actually has the capacity to hold more than your volume of blood, which is one of the reasons why people faint. If your whole venous system relaxes, the little muscles in your veins that keep them squished, they keep the pressure in your veins. If they all relax, all the blood will pull in your legs, and you won't have any blood pressure, and you will faint. So you have plenty of veins.
Plenty of veins. So we can take out the bad veins shut them down.
And divert the blood into the deeper veins that are working properly, and so you don't have that blood pulling underneath the skin and causing the bulges. And what used to be done was called vein stripping, where we would make incisions on the leg and pull the veins out.
Sounds pretty brutal.
It had to be done under general anesthesia because it was so painful, and most patients were walking very slowly, if at all, for a week or two after it, and you have a big bruised, very painful leg. What we can do now is what we call ablate the vein. So we use a heat source, either laser or radio frequency, to damage the inner lining of the vein and to rearrange the collagen, which is one of the proteins the vein is made out of, and cause the vein to shrink and scar and go away.
So you put a detour sign in front of the damaged vein, essentially by rearranging the collagen by heat or radio frequency.
Basically destroy the vein.
And no more will the blood flow.
And the blood will go to other veins.
So rather than taking it out, you're just shutting it down.
That's correct.
Huh. And so what's the recovery like with the laser ablation versus, say, the traditional stripping?
It's done in the office under local anesthetic. So you could drive yourself home. What we normally do is put an ace bandage or a stocking on, which you wear for a few days, and most patients are back to their usual activities the next day. I would say 10% of the patients complain about some aching or bruising of the leg, but no one generally requires anything more than some Tylenol or Advil.
Very interesting. So we go from general surgery to really an outpatient surgery in your office, and with a recovery that's almost nominal.
That's correct.
Great. Now, this isn't just a cosmetic issue. There are some health effects here with having varicose veins?
Yes. For one thing, they're uncomfortable, they ache. Because of the pressure in the veins, if you bang your leg on something over those varicosities, they will bleed profusely. The big problem is that because of that increased pressure in the veins, it decreases the nutrient delivery to the cells in the skin and the subcutaneous tissue, and patients can develop ulcerations just as if they weren't getting enough arterial flow. And until those veins are fixed, the ulcerations are very difficult to heal. And it's debilitating. And in patients with other underlying problems such as diabetes or other issues, those ulcers can get infected, and you can actually end up with an amputation. Although that's very rare, it can happen. But most of you have chronic cellulitis, chronic inflammatory conditions of the legs, which you end up being in the hospital, and it's quite debilitating.
So for most people, most health insurances will help you recover the cost of this type of surgery.
Yes. The insurance covers the evaluation and treatment of varicose vein disease for the most part. There are some small cosmetic procedures for, say, spider veins that are generally not covered, but for those cases, we do offer them at a very reasonable price to patients, and they generally do fine.
Great. Dr. Goldstein, how would someone out there contact your office if they have questions about these procedures?
Our phone number is, it's area code 518-272-0027. I have a website which they can get more information on. It's littlescars.com. Those are the best ways to reach us.
That's terrific. We'll put those on the screen, so those who didn't catch it the first time will grab it now. Dr. Stephen Goldstein, we are out of time. We have used up all of our time so quickly today. I want to thank you for coming in and talking about minimally invasive alternatives to traditional surgery. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
All right. You've been watching the Science and Education segment here on Impact. Thanks for watching.
Proctors, bringing the best in arts, education, and entertainment.